Good evening. Please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance, and we will be led by Representative Kristen Cloutier.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Tonight's workshop will be presented by the Lewiston Auburn Transitional Resource Center representatives. And since this is a workshop, there will be no public comment. However, the public could certainly email publiccomment@lewistonmaine.gov. Do I have that right, Administrator?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Please begin, and please introduce yourselves.
Good evening. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to be here tonight. My name is Kevin Bollard. I am currently the president of Caden's Kitchen Food Pantry. 5 years ago yesterday, Caden's Kitchen launched its official Facebook page to the community out of an extra bedroom in our home. Today we are grateful for the opportunity to present a funding proposal to the council in hope of launching Lewiston Auburn's first Transitional Resource Center. For the past couple months, this amazing group of community advocates has been finalizing the proposal you will be presented this evening. I ask you tonight to push aside some of the stereotypes and stigmas attached to homelessness. Let's look at them as members of our community who are in the most vulnerable state in life and what we can do as a city to help them on the road back to a self-sustainable lifestyle. This presentation is not about another shelter, but about a state-of-the-art community-changing resource that has been proven to help change life's direction for those deemed unhelpable. Thank you for the chance to speak this evening.
Thank you. I'm not crying. I just got something in my eye right as we started, so I just wanted to say that. My name is Megan Parks. I was born and raised here in Lewiston, and I live in Ward 7 currently. I'm a private practice social worker and substance use clinician here in Lewiston, and for the last 24 months, I've been the director of the temporary homeless and quarantine programs here in Lewiston. Previously, I've worked in the community providing case management, mental health services for over a decade, including as a former mobile crisis clinician, and I serve in various capacities here in Lewiston on committees and boards.
So I'm going to read my introduction. I'm not as great with my words as them. My name is Tanya Sanz. I am the day shelter manager at Trinity Jubilee Center. I also worked with the Lost and Wellness program from beginning to end and have continued as a supervisor with the quarantine program. I started out working with youth experiencing homelessness or at risk of becoming homeless. I now work with all ages. I also have several years of crisis experience. I moved away from Lewiston several years ago and returned in 2017 when my position at Trinity was available. I had volunteered there as an AmeriCorps member when I was younger, and I was excited to come back. I missed being here in Lewiston. Often I bragged about the diversity in our city and our passionate community members and the abundance of resources that some other towns do not offer. As a young teen mother, I utilized many of these resources and relied on support from local agencies to become successful with a plan to come back and give back to our community. I've always been proud to have been born and raised here and always knew I would eventually return. Addressing homelessness has always been a topic of discussion. The awareness is already here. We know that there's an issue in our community and more resources are needed. I'm here today with a group of determined, passionate people hoping to gain support for the startup cost of the Lewiston Auburn Transitional Resource Center. I hope that you all take the time to think about the benefits of our program before deciding your vote. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jamie Cowett. I currently work at Lewiston High School. I run a program called The Store Next Door. We take care of homeless youth at Lewiston. I work K through 12. I've also been a social work for over 20 years doing case management with adults and children in Lewiston. Our program at Lewiston covers basic needs and food for homeless youth in our school district. We have a pantry and a clothing closet in the basement right now of Lewiston High School, and we're covering all the needs of K through 12 students here in Lewiston.
Hi, my name is Kimber Sands. I was born and raised in Lewiston. I've spent a considerable amount of time volunteering at a local shelter over the past 4 or 5 years. I've been working at the Lewiston Wellness Shelter since May of 2020, and I am the manager of the Lewiston Quarantine Shelter. The time that I've spent with the unhoused individuals in this community, it sparked a passion in me to help as many as I could. I'm very thankful for the opportunity we have today presenting our project to the Lewiston City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to add to our introductions to point out, as many of us have said, we're all local residents. We were all born and raised here. We've grown up here on these streets of Lewiston. And we're passionate about helping this community and focusing our services on this community. I know there's been some concern about a program like this potentially bringing in people from outside of our community, but our group is here to target the Lewiston community. We want to see better for the Lewiston-Auburn area. And in many discussions that we're in at a statewide level, statewide, there's eyes on Lewiston. We don't have a 24-hour program. We don't have a low-barrier program in our city, and we're the second largest city in the state. So there are people all over the state, agencies from the smallest agency to the top, watching Lewiston, and they want to make a move in this community. And I just want to say that if the city of Lewiston doesn't support our group of local citizens who are trying to make an impact on our community, a much larger agency is very likely to step in, and that we have concerns about that because the services won't be as customized as we intend to deliver them. We see potential for if an outside agency were to come in, we could see a potential for broader negative impacts in our community than what we're proposing. Go ahead. So I know that you guys have all seen the PowerPoint, I believe, before now. I think it was sent out. This is a review of our history of what we've been doing for the last just shy of 2 years. We opened the Lewiston Wellness Shelter at the Armory in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It was a 60-bed shelter that provided 24-hour low-barrier services to Lewiston, Auburn. We provided wraparound services in-house. It was a little bit of a delayed start because we were literally building the airplane as we were flying it at that time because it was a rapid response to the pandemic. And so we got a late start on providing services, but even with that late start and multiple interruptions for extensions, we were relatively successful in that short period of time. It was originally 12 weeks, and then we got 3-week extensions. So it ended up being 15 weeks. In less than 15 weeks, we were able to connect 66% of the people with case management, and 42% of them were rehoused by the time we closed that program. And then we transitioned to the Ramada to continue offering services. And at that time, between July 17th of 2020 and November 15th of 2020, we were providing just quarantine services for Androscoggin County in response to the pandemic. We reopened to serve the homeless population on November 15th. And from November 15th to September 30th, we were able to connect 90% of our guests with case management services. And we had a 59.5% rehousing rate. Which is a good success, again, with inconsistent start and stop of a program. There are some discrepancies on, I think you guys were originally presented our original PowerPoint, and then we had to make some adjustments. In order to qualify for any of this funding, there's a requirement to participate in HMIS, which is the Homeless Management Information System. It's a state program that collates data from the homeless population. And at the time we were at the Armory, again, we got that set up really quickly. We were doing paper packets because we weren't set up at the time to do the electronic system. My understanding from talking to the people who were providing the information to city at the time, the information that had previously been provided to the city of Lewiston from the Armory program was a snapshot in time compilation of the data, and it did not include the data from the last couple weeks that occurred prior, when there was an extension, the last few week extension. And that HMIS data is the definitive once that was compiled at a later date. But regardless of that, we did adjust the PowerPoint and we adjust our ask to support the numbers that the city had. We didn't want to create any conflict with that. So we resorted back to the data that was originally provided to the city of Lewiston, which we can provide updated data to everybody in the future around that. some of the hurdles that we had at the Armory program. Originally, it was 12 weeks. We then got an extension, but we weren't allowed to take any new intakes. Once we started back up in November, that originally was approved to run until March. We ended up getting an extension on that. Consistency is the key to any kind of stability with addressing homelessness, and the lack of consistency and stability throughout those programs impacted our numbers. So although they are impressive, because those people would still be on the streets had we not had these programs, we definitely believe a permanent program can do better. These are some of the community collaborators that we worked with throughout the Armory program and at the Ramada. Several of them are case management agencies that provided services in-house to our guests. They came to us. That's a huge piece because often when working with this population, even if they're enrolled in case management or services, their providers can't reach them. They may not have a phone. They don't have a consistent place to be. So it's a real struggle for providers to connect with the people that they're trying to serve. So we were able to provide access to these services in one spot, and that's what our plan is to continue doing moving forward. I think that was all on that. Part of the community collaboration, sorry. So we've been operating on a community-based problem-solving approach. That's a term that encompasses all of the providers coming together. There's different models of addressing homelessness, but if you dig into any of them, the most successful programs take a community-based problem-solving approach, and that involves bringing all of those providers together for sort of a one-stop for the clientele. Kevin, you were going to go?
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the common things that we've heard, throughout this process, as far as concerns, is, well, don't we have enough shelters already? Which is a great question and definitely very valid. But what we're proposing is not a shelter. What we're proposing is a transitional resource center that transitions people out of homelessness into a self-sustainable lifestyle. Some of the differences between the business model that we're looking to propose and the current shelters that are available are some of the biggest challenges facing the homeless currently, which would have to do with barriers. Our shelter would be low barrier when all of the other shelters in the community are currently high barrier. The congregate status, actually all of the shelters currently are congregate, where it's an open concept setting. We would be a non-congregate shelter, which also provides a sense of privacy, a sense of responsibility for your own space, and it gives a little bit more of personal empowerment than just putting a bunch of beds in an open room. And one of the biggest differences is the hours of operation. People question in our community why the homeless people are on our streets all day. Why are they standing on the corners begging for money? Why are they out and about roaming the area? Well, unfortunately, all of our current shelters don't allow those individuals to stay during the day. They provide, great service in having a place to sleep at night. Most of them do provide a breakfast in the morning, but basically come 7:30 to 4 or 5, you're expected to fend for yourself out on the streets. So if we wonder why these people are walking around town, sometimes aimlessly wondering what to do, that's a strong reason why, because they have no other alternatives. We want to provide that alternative to them, to where we can provide resources on a 24/7 basis. Some of these individuals struggle to find a place to go to the bathroom during the day. We have a location that allows them that ability to have that human right that all of us deserve. So we have the ability to provide 24/7 resources, from a substance abuse to a mental health standpoint, food, resources, clothing, warming center, a place that people can actually rely on permanently, no matter what time of the day it is. So that's something that we definitely take a lot of pride in, as far as the difference between our model and the current models that exist. And one of the other things I would like to highlight as well is all of the other current shelters are currently non-ADA compliant. And that's definitely a huge challenge out there. We have the ability to be ADA compliant and allow that extra additional service opportunity. We're looking at opportunities to provide programs for homeless families as well. which include opportunities to keep families together instead of putting them in a shelter situation where the husband and wife might be separated, even possibly potentially from their children, on separate floors. Our location would provide an opportunity to keep those families together without that forced separation, to attend our program.
I wanted to comment, there's an error on here, and that's my fault. Hope Haven does provide services to women. I have it marked as no, but that should say yes. That was an oversight on my part. One of the only prospects for growth, we're not looking to create a huge conglomerate of homeless services in Lewiston. We want to keep our program centrally located and serving Lewiston. The only potential growth that we have considered is expanding to provide services to youth in the future. And Jamie is going to speak on that since she is our local expert on youth homelessness.
So right now in Lewiston, we have New Beginnings as our homeless shelter. They have 12 beds available, but working in the schools and using them almost every single day. So right now we have 186 homeless youth identified in Lewiston Public Schools right now. When we call New Beginnings, if they have a youth that is, say, 12 years old, and we have a 17-year-old, we're unable to house our 17-year-old. So we would have to send that youth to Portland or outsource that youth. And a lot of the time, right now with COVID and transportation, we don't want to send that youth to Portland because transportation is an issue. We have bus issues, so the youth, to be able to get the youth back to school, it just makes a lot of issues and disrupting education. So housing for youth and just having a 12-bed unit for youth is a problem. So housing for youth is a huge issue in Lewiston that will need to be addressed at some point. So we're going to have to look at that eventually.
And I know it's obvious and probably goes without saying, but homeless youth, when we don't have the services in the community to address their needs, become homeless adults.
Right.
And then if we're not providing services to adults, we're not addressing the problem at any level. We're going to elaborate on the barriers to shelters just a little bit more. I won't go over all of them, but there's several in the current shelter system here in Lewiston. First example is case management. Several of the local shelters will not admit anyone into their programming, even just to stay overnight, unless they're already working with case management. And right now, in part because of COVID and because of staffing issues, there are long wait lists for placement for case management. So that means people are sitting outdoors, unable to get indoors, while they wait on a wait list in order just to get a case manager. Obviously, there are several shelters. Our shelters are a high barrier, so they're going anyone that has a substance use issue or untreated mental illness or anything along those lines. Sometimes they'll take people with the untreated mental illness, but they don't last indoors very long because of their behaviors, because of their illness. Staff in most of our current shelters aren't prepared to deal with those issues, and people get kicked out. One of our local shelters has a 12-month stay ban. So if you spend one night in that shelter and then you choose to leave or you're kicked out one way or another, then you're not allowed to return for 12 months. So even if you just decide, okay, Aunt Mary decided I could stay on her couch for a little bit, so you go to stay on Aunt Mary's couch because it's more comfortable, and then Aunt Mary says, never mind, I can't have you here, you can't return to the shelter for no fault of your own for 12 months, and they keep a rolling list of that. Most of the shelters require people to stop in at Lewiston PD first and get a printout showing that they don't have any active warrants for their arrest or that they don't have a criminal history. If you have any kind of a criminal history, the shelters won't allow you in the door. If you have pending charges, some people have not been able to be served by the local shelter system because they have a job, and their job keeps them from returning to line up at the shelter at the time it is to check in. So they don't get a bed because they have a job. And if you don't have a job, if you don't have a place to sleep, it's really hard to maintain a job. Some shelters have a barrier where if you do have a job, they'll withhold a percentage of your income. And so you're working to try to better your situation, but you're paying into the shelter that you're in at the same time. It makes it difficult to save up the money in order to better your situation. And then as Kevin previously mentioned, none of our current shelters are ADA compliant. So anyone with a walker, a wheelchair, or any kind of disability that makes them even slightly immobile, they have no place in any of our current shelters.
So in regards to the specific location, obviously due to the potential negotiations in regards to purchasing the building, we did originally decide to keep the location confidential. I was informed that we provided a confidential memo to the council in regards to the location per your request. So hopefully that did satisfy that need. But we definitely did our due diligence, you know, when looking at the location. One of the concerns obviously is zoning. This place is properly zoned for shelter use. It's a commercial building in the Lewiston area that, based off of our numbers, has been empty since 2014, but we believe it could be many years prior to that as well. There's a very small multi-unit housing abutting the building, but other than that, it is not in a primary residential area. One of the benefits to the location is it's currently already in walking distance and readily accessible to the different community needs, hospitals, resources that are already currently available. A concern obviously is the impact on the business district. This location is not directly in the business district. It's not on Lower Lisbon Street area or in our prime downtown area. So we feel that should not be a concern to those businesses. And also it is currently close to the current shelters, which obviously supports the theory that of the zoning and the thought process and current use of those locations in our community are already providing the same type of resources in that area.
If you notice in the front of the packets that we handed out to you, there's a stack of statements of support from the community. Several of those statements of support are from the abutting and neighboring business owners and apartment owners around the property that we're proposing. We have letters and verbal statements of support from most of the businesses that are immediately surrounding it, as well as the apartment buildings, church, other things that are in the area. It's important to note that because there are 3 other shelters in direct relation, less than a quarter of a mile away from this location, there's already homeless folks living in the doorways of the businesses, hanging out in the businesses, in the church, in the laundromats, in all of the businesses that are in that area. And so in talking to the people in that area, they were relieved that we were going to be opening in that area because it's going to help alleviate some of their burden. And you can see that in some of the statements that we've provided to you. And then a lot of the feedback, we saw tons of feedback for this, and a lot of the feedback that we received from the downtown business district, Lisbon Street, Pine Street, et cetera, supported it being accessible, but away from the business district, so as to draw people from congregating in front of their businesses. And there's letters to that extent in your packets as well. And this goes back to you.
And obviously one of the concerns is obviously the visual appeal. Sometimes with the word shelter, you get, negative stigmas or stereotypes as far as the presentability to the community. What we're looking to propose is to take a building that is been degrading for many years, is spray painted, has graffiti on it, has homeless individuals sleeping in the doorway, and transitioning into a state-of-the-art resource center that can actually provide resources to these individuals. So what I personally would consider something as being a visible eyesore in our community currently, we would be transitioning into a resource center that actually provides value back to the community. So we just wanted to provide a couple snapshots of the kind of concept that we've come up with, just from a visual layout. Your top 2 slides basically consist of the first floor. So the building is primarily all windows on the first floor. We would have an entryway that would lead into a warming center, and then would also have your basic resources on hand as well, as far as clothing, toiletries, your average day-to-day items that individuals in the homeless community are always in need of. Along with that, on the first floor, we would have multiple meeting and agency rooms for the different organizations that come in and provide services, whether it's mental health resources or financial aid resources, along with a general common area for individuals as well. On the second floor of the building would basically be where the non-congregate shelter would be, to where you have the individual pods that would allow the individuals to have a sense of privacy and responsibility for their own space, a potential area for larger living spaces for families or individuals with multiple people that are coming into the program, along with a basic area for men's and women's showers, and basic toilets and restroom services, along with a common area for individuals to kind of gather, have dinner, and kind of, have that community feel. So we believe that this model has a lot of sustainability to it and would allow us to bring all of the resources together under one roof for these individuals.
The ADA compliant rooms would be on the first floor. We forgot to mention that. So this slide depicts our capital cost request. It's hard with nonprofit and this type of services to sort of give a projection of what the costs will be moving forward. The best way to predict that is based off of historical service provision. And so the best way we could sort of itemize our requests for the capital for this were to break it down by who we have served for the last 21 months. And as you can see, the funding breakdown almost exactly mirrors the requests that we're going to make for the for funding for who we have served. And these numbers were also adjusted, as I had said previously, to the numbers that the city had been provided to fix that discrepancy. All of our requests, sorry, I just lost myself on my notes. All of these requests for the city of Lewiston, the city of Auburn, and then for Maine Housing are going to be contingent upon each other. Our ultimate goal for capital expenses, our capital budget for purchasing the property and the restoration of it and remodel is $600,000. So if each request is going to be contingent upon each other. If we do not meet our $600 goal, if 2 out of the 3 agree to provide us with the funding and the third one doesn't, then we would need an opportunity to find a different funding source in order to fill that gap. But neither of the municipalities or Maine Housing are going to be on the hook to make up that difference or to provide the funding if we haven't met our goal. I apologize if I'm not verbalizing this correctly, but they will all be contingent upon each other in meeting our goal. This is going to segue into our operational costs, because we did field a bunch of questions this weekend about that. We don't have a slide on operational costs because we are not requesting any operational funding from the city of Lewiston or the Lewiston taxpayers. The economy, politics, all kinds of things impact nonprofit finances. We all know that. Any nonprofit operational budgets are typically built solely on knowledge gained from what has come before. We don't have a permanent program, so we have to base it on what we know from the last 20 months. Our plans moving forward with this project are to use a rolling financial forecast, which will be updated monthly to provide real-time numbers on cash flow for decision-making. This method of finance keeping increases accuracy of our budget and allows for quick response and adjustment on the fly, and that helps to absorb the ups and downs that come with the things that dictate nonprofit funding. This type of flexibility in financial management creates improved identification of opportunities and risks and allows for quicker response times to mitigate these risks. Our staffing model is going to be relatively small because we have the benefit of the resource center. So our partnerships that we've made with all of the community agencies that were listed previously That helps us keep our operational costs low. We are not paying for the services that these agencies are providing. These are agencies that are established to bill insurance, bill main care. They get funding in their own way. So we're essentially providing the space for them to meet their clients and provide the service. And then each of those agencies do their own billing. This benefits our program by helping keeping operational costs down. It benefits the unhoused population by providing them an accessible place to get these services. And it benefits the agencies, especially during the pandemic. They saw a drop in enrollment, so it benefits the agencies by being able to get their billable requirements in order for them to continue operating. Beyond that, and to speak on the staffing, just because several of them are here, I wanted to comment that almost all of our staff have been with us through the entire almost 2 years of our temporary program at the Armory and the Ramada. They have worked diligently, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When many people were on unemployment, our staff showed up to work every day without fear of exposure to COVID or anything. They took precautions, we stayed safe and healthy, and they have worked really, really hard, and many of them are here. So I want to acknowledge their hard work. Most of our staff, our current staff, plan to continue to work in this new program. That speaks to their dedication, so I wanted to acknowledge that. The balance of the operational expenses are going to be made up by eShop funding, which is through Maine, it's federal funding through Maine Housing. That varies depending on bed nights, client enrollment, those kind of details, and their reimbursement rate varies between 20 and 40%. So we would be making up that difference in grants. Private donors, we've already had private donors reach out to us wanting to support this program. And then we have the prospect of the retail self-sustainability, which Kevin is going to speak more on.
So under our current business model that we operate under for Cadence Kitchen, we take a lot of pride in having what we consider a self-sustainable model. After 5 years, we currently have made no requests to the city for funding. We do not operate on any state or federal grants. All of the costs and overhead that our company incurs is covered by private donors, business donations, relationships with corporations and individuals in the community, along with our resale thrift store model. So we have a hybrid model that allows us to provide resources to the community through different agencies like Safe Voices, New Beginnings, Community Concepts. All of those resources are provided at no cost to those individuals. That's supported by our retail thrift store, which allows us to, similar to a Goodwill model, sell donated goods with all of those proceeds going back into the operating costs for the business. After 5 years in operation, we take a lot of pride in the fact that we currently have not pulled any payroll. All of the proceeds that Cadence Kitchen has received has 100% gone right back into the community. So we take a lot of pride in really being self-sustainable, not relying on the taxpayers or the city for any type of funding to maintain our model. We feel that this would also give us an opportunity when individuals enter the program. It gives us an immediate connection with job development. We could immediately have these individuals go on to employment under Cadence Kitchen, work directly in the resale thrift store, and then connect them with financial aid services to start to build personal cash flow and savings accounts for their transition out of the program.
These are some samples from the letters of support that we received. The entire letters are in all of your packets. In addition to the ones on the screen and the ones included in your packet, we do have verbal statements of support from A Century of Care Alliance, which is one of our partner agencies that provides case management, Keith Tannenbaum, who owns the Vault on downtown Lisbon Street, Pat, whose name I'm going to forget. What is Pat's last name? She works at one of the churches that's in the neighborhood that we're considering relocating in. Dr. Haynes, who provides medical services at Trinity. Paul Rancourt, who is a business and apartment owner here in town. And then all of the ones in your packet.
And I think these letters of support are a good mix of addressing some of the business concerns that are attached to this type of proposal. As we can see across the board, I think a lot of people have acknowledged their concerns about homelessness. I think the question everybody asks is, what are we going to do about it? Currently, I don't think there's a plan in place to address these concerns. I mean, we've reviewed the 10-year plan that the city had put in place back in 2008, and I believe now we're about 3 years past that plan, and we've seen no progress. So at this point, you know, I think even the business leaders out there are looking for some sort of positive change and resources to change the direction, you know, that we're headed.
We have 4 slides that have success stories from our temporary programs. The names have been changed to protect people's identities. I won't make the audience sit and read them all if they don't want to. But these were just 4 snapshots to provide you with a sample of the people, the makeup of the people that we've served over the last 2 years and how they have turned their lives around in a very short time through temporary programs to show the impact. If we have this much of an impact on the community, and there's many more, we just chose these 4. If we were able to have this impact with a broken temporary program that was starting and stopping, imagine the impact that we could have on our community with a permanent program that doesn't have end dates cutting us off in the middle of success. And then the other side of the work that we do. These 6 individuals were enrolled in our programs either at the Armory or the Ramada. In the time in between when those programs were shut down, all 6 of these individuals passed away while they were homeless. They were unhoused and died. So I just want to give a little snapshot of each of them. In the top left corner is Richard Bender. He's a Native American man who went by the name of Windwalker. He was a peaceful man who loved Earth and cared for people passionately. He passed away homeless in Portland in April of 2021 at the age of 61. The second picture in the middle is Paul Hersom. He was a talented musician and a father to a young son in the picture when he died in December of 2021 at the age of 33. In the Armory program, he created community and brought everybody together by playing his guitar and singing music with all of the other guests. He always just wanted to make people happy. At the top right corner is Christina Yeaton. She was a mom and an artist. I don't know if any of you recall, but when we were at the Armory, some of the guests had spray painted and airbrushed sheets to thank the community for allowing the program to be there. And she was the one that had initiated that project and did a lot of the artwork on that. She wanted to give back and thank the community in any way that she could. She died in May of 2021 here in Lewiston at the age of 36. In the bottom left corner is Charles Teague. He was loved by his children and his family and well known in the community. He died in Lewiston in July of 2021 at the age of 49. Second from the left on the bottom is Chris Miquelon. Chris lived a very rough life. He lost his mother and his father when he was a young child. He grew up mostly with his sister. He was talented and passionate, and he left behind his only sibling, his sister, when he died in August of 2021 at the age of 33. In the bottom right is Jeremy Hiltz, who was a loving dad to his young son and daughter when he died in Lewiston in November of 2021. Each of these people had a past, and some people in this room may know some of these people in not so great lights, but nothing is deserving of dying alone homeless, and we as a community need to do better. And we'll open it up to questions.
Thank you very much for being here. Discussion, questions from the council? Councilor Scott.
So first off, I want to thank you for coming, presenting us with this and showing your passion and commitment to our community. What you all do individually is a great service to our community, and I want you to know that we greatly appreciate that. I do have several questions, though. And I want you to understand that I don't think that anybody sitting up here or any of my cohorts think that this is not an issue that we need to solve or address or work towards. And I think it's absolutely unfortunate that we had a plan in place back in 2008 and nothing came to fruition with that plan. But we also, all of us sitting here, have to think about every aspect of what's happening in our community and ensuring that everything is done in a way that's going to be a positive impact for everybody in our community, including the homeless. So I have a couple of specific questions geared towards what you have said, but I'd like to ask permission from the mayor as the chair of our city council, if I may ask some questions to some of our staff. And that it would be Lincoln Jeffers, if he's available to answer a couple of questions, and also Chief St. Pierre, if that would be possible.
Chief St. Pierre, are you present? Excellent.
Because I think some of the stuff that we're talking about, they have some information that might be helpful for the council. If I might, Link, if I could start with you. And I apologize, just in preparation and for everybody to know, I have quite a few questions and things to ask, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Please continue, Councilor.
Thank
you,
you.
Link.
So, Mr. Jeffers, I appreciate you being here this evening to talk to us. I'm wondering if we could have, because there was a lot of email exchange from you to the council about some information on some of the funding, the main housing, the home consortium, the ESHAP funds, and so I'm wondering if you could give us a little more detail on how some of that funding works and what we can look at for how that funding would be available for a project like this.
Yes, I'd be happy to speak on the issue. The city of Auburn and Lewiston have a home consortium, and we got $1.78 million in funds specifically to help address homelessness in communities. The way our consortium agreement works out, 15% of that goes to administrative costs, and at the end of the day, we'll have about $722,800 that would be available to go out to agencies to help make things happen. When this first started coming through, I'm more accustomed to creating new affordable housing projects, use LIHTC and whatnot, so I have some familiarity with the rules. So I really checked with our HUD rep down in Boston, who's fabulous and really knows the rules and regulations intimately. And she noted that the same rules would apply here as do with the LIHTC projects, where all of the funding would need to be committed, secured, and you've got banks of letters of commitment, whether it's main housing, City of Auburn, or other independent financing to that, not only for the construction, the capital costs, but also a long-term operational costs. They need to be confident that this project is coming together and they have the experience to run it. They have the experience to develop the project as far as doing the construction management and whatnot. And longer term, it's a 10-year period where they would expect to have operational expenses done. One thing I could not tell looking at the renderings they put together, I know it's supposed to be a 20-bed shelter. HUD wants them to have, the legislation says they need to have individual bathrooms for each, so you need 20 bathrooms. And looking at the renderings, it was hard, it looked like it was more, I think they described them as pods. You sort of have a small private room with your bed, perhaps a dresser or something, but it did not appear that you had 20 bathrooms in that project. That would be a requirement to make the project eligible for the home dollars. And I know the number that was put out tonight, one of my questions had been, what's the development cost on this project? The number that was out there was $600,000. And especially if it does not already include 20 bathrooms, I would be concerned that we need significantly more money to build it to be eligible for the home dollars. As far as the ESHAF money, which comes from main housing, which has been referenced as a source to help fund the operational costs, I think it was 20 to 40% is what was mentioned tonight. And that is a variable funding source. It's based on the number of beds that are in the program each year, and you get a percentage of it, and it's a little bit variable on what your success rate is. You get a little bit higher percentage. Instead of $1 for every bed that you've got, you get $1.20 for each bed, just to sort of put the
give you a sense of how it works. You get a little bit of incentive if you have good success with the program, if you're dealing with a more difficult population. Each of those gives you incentives. But I think you're still limited, as the proponents here have put forth. Probably the most you'd be able to get would be that 40%. From HUD's perspective, that's good, but they also need to have some assurance that that there's long-term funding to keep this afloat and operational. If it is not, the city's at risk for having to pay back the monies that we put in. If we did it, the project goes forward. Ultimately, it doesn't get the funding it needs to operate. The project's considered a failure from home dollars. The intent behind the dollars hasn't been met, at which point the city would be at risk for reimbursing the federal government. Does that cover the issues?
I think so. So if I'm understanding correctly, there is, in order for some of these funds to be used, like the home funds, what I was reading was that there's a 15-year operational plan that needs to be in place, funding secured, so viability of the project is assured. Is that correct?
Yes, and actually, although when I wrote that email, I was under the impression it was 15 years. I just had a conversation today, because this would be rehab. It's a 10-year.
10-year, okay, thank you. And in respect to the home consortium agreement with Auburn and how we use that funding, is it correct to say that this process needs to be the same as like the CDBG funding, where it has to have a vetted process with people looking at how this is going to work to ensure that this money is going to be available?
Exactly. It's not as simple as, good project, good, reasonable request, we need to fund it. There is a whole process that we need to go through in concert with Auburn. Auburn is a little bit out of the gate. They have started with they've talked to some of the stakeholders, and they have a survey that they have out there. We need to catch up. We'll be meeting with them a little bit later this week to pick that up, but it's very much actually like our consolidated plan, which is a 5-year strategic plan where you meet with stakeholders, you engage with citizens, and say, we've got these resources, how are they best utilized, and make other agencies aware as well. And the amount we have available is about $722,000. They're not asking for all of it, so certainly other agencies would be eligible, but there is a pretty lengthy process that we need to go through.
And also, am I correct in understanding that some of this funding can be used for several different things outside of just a non-congregate housing? Like there
yes.
is other things that it could be used for, like to supplement some housing costs. We'll say, an example I was thinking of, if there are folks that are waiting for possibly a Section 8 housing voucher, and we know that process is almost a year out and actually receiving that voucher, there's a long wait list on that. Could possibly some of these funds be used to help offset a cost of a family who's homeless, get an apartment, and while waiting for their Section 8 housing?
It functions just like Section 8 does. It's not a long-term solution for the family, but it's called tenant-based rental assistance, and it's exactly
Okay.
that model.
Thank you, thank you. I appreciate that. And if I could, Chief St. Pierre?
Good evening.
Hi, thank
Hi.
you. Thank you very much for being available for us this evening. I appreciate it.
Very welcome.
So I would like to ask you about the need, or if there was, police presence on hand while the Armory and the Ramada was being used.
So in terms of the Armory, when the Armory temporary shelter was in place, they actually hired the police around the clock. So we did have an officer situated right on the property in a police car, available at any time throughout the evening, overnights, days, nights, 24 hours a day. In terms of the Ramada, it was something on a call-by-call basis where they'd call us if they needed assistance. I mean, quite frankly, we obviously did some property site checks on a regular basis as well.
Okay. Was there a cost, do you know what the cost was involved in that? As far as the use of that, how much that might have cost the police department?
The city was paid through FEMA funds.
All through FEMA
Lewiston
funds?
PD was paid $180,000 total for that. That was
Thank
our
you.
largest expense from the Armory program.
Thank you.
The city didn't incur expenses from that.
Okay, that's what I was just checking. So were there any calls for disturbances or any issues with fights or anything in the shelter itself as that was going on, the Armory or the Ramada?
Yes, there was several calls at both locations. We respond to calls everywhere, regardless of where that might be.
Right.
But yes, we did in fact receive several calls for service at both.
Okay, I appreciate that. So the reason I'm asking some of those questions was because in your presentation, as you're telling us about the overhead cost and stuff, and that there's really not going to be a cost to the city, I just want to make sure that we understand that if there is police calls that need to be made and some of the other things, that will be a cost to the city.
Yes.
Right.
It's important to consider the counter of that as well. The city accrues an expense right now, and is accruing an expense right now. These pages, which I got from Officer St. Pierre, are several pages of the police response that is now responding to the Super 8 motel and the Motel 6 since our program closed on September 30th. There has been massive amounts of calls where many of the people that were previously in our program are now being housed at those hotels without supervision, and are living there through the ERA program. And so there is an increased use of police services now without our program as well. So I think that there's a balance there that's important to note.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Because I think it is important to note and to hear what, because these are the reason I'm asking a lot of these questions is because these are questions that I have been asked by constituents and
Right.
others. And I did extensive research on low barrier shelters over the last 2 weeks to ensure that I knew exactly what this was going to be. And everything that might be asked and brought up, because there's going to be a lot of questions from the community.
Right.
And one of the biggest things I learned in doing my research was that in order for a low barrier shelter to really be successful in a community, it has to have really strong support from the community. And so I think it's important that if we're going to move forward with anything like this, it's going to have to be something that has to have that support from all of us. I think that's really important. So if I may continue, Mr. Mayor?
Please continue, Councilor Scott.
So you did touch a little bit upon how many staff members and what you're going to have for the funding there. Do you feel that that's going to be adequate to cover? And I'm asking this question because how many beds were we talking about again?
24.
Because that wasn't mentioned. How many?
24.
24. Okay, so what if this grows bigger?
So we have no intention of growing it bigger. Our only plan for growth is further down the road to address the youth homelessness issue in our community, and that would be at a separate site at some time in the future. We have no intention of expanding this program. Through our experiences at the Armory, we served 60 people at a time, and our beds were full the whole time. 60 was hard to manage. We had a larger staff. Even with a larger staff, it was harder to manage, and it was definitely harder to get people connected with resources in an efficient way. At the Ramada, we had 28 people, and that was much more manageable, as reflected in our 90% success rate of getting people connected with the case management and the resources. 28 was definitely a more manageable number with our smaller staff. One of the key pieces is when this program was hired for at the Armory, it was pulled together literally in a week. Pretty much anyone that applied was hired. There was no screening for skills. There was no screening for de-escalation, for training, for dealing with mental health, for dealing with substance use issues. People were hired, and then as people couldn't keep up with the work or couldn't handle it, they left, and then our team developed from there. Over the last 2 years, the various agencies that we've worked under have provided extensive training to our staff. And we have the majority of the staff that are with us now, still doing the quarantine program, have stayed throughout the whole time, and they're very trained. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I know in the conversation that I had with Officer St. Pierre the other day, he acknowledged that we had a lot less need for police response at the Ramada program than we did at the Armory, because the staff just knew how to manage the behaviors better. There were clearer expectations. Everything was much better at the Ramada program as we were more established than the program that had just started in a matter of a few days at the Armory.
Thank you. So you spoke about if you were to expand, so I was a little concerned when you said, because a low barrier homeless shelter, in my opinion, might have some issues with youth. I would have a little bit of an issue with youth and families living there, because low barrier means that we can have some folks that are on substances or have been drinking or some of those things, and I would have a little bit of concern about the mix of that environment together and the safety of the children and some of the families being comfortable being in an environment like that.
Right. We would definitely keep those separate.
Okay. So I know that the proposed location is confidential at this point, but I did take a walk around the neighborhood. It is someplace that I walk very frequently, and it is a neighborhood that I know very well because it's just outside of my ward. And I was a little concerned about the fact that there was no green space or outdoor space around the building. And where will the residents hang out outside? Smoking cigarettes, doing anything else, low barrier shelter, they can come in being intoxicated or other things, but they can't do the things inside the building, correct? Which means they're going to be outside doing these things before they go into the building. Is there any concern about that? I have some serious concerns about the location and that happening in the area. I understand that you've gotten some support letters from businesses and locations around the area, but there are a couple of other big places there that may not necessarily support this location. How do you plan on addressing that situation?
Well, we're well aware of the fact that we're never going to get 100% support of the community, of everybody around us. So our goal is not to get 100% support. That would just be unrealistic. As long as we have the majority of the support and we're doing good work, I think that's the important piece to focus on. When we were walking through the neighborhood, speaking with families, people, business owners, we found hypodermic needles on the ground. We found evidence that people were doing those things. Those things are happening there right now. They have been for a long time. And if nothing changes, they're going to continue to happen. We're going to be set up there. We're going to be providing people a place to go indoors, to access the resources that they need to address those issues. And to not be stumbling on the road, sleeping in doorways, vomiting in laundromats, doing all of the things that we've heard are happening. The building, there is an area that's shared with a neighboring building right now that the neighboring building is using for parking. We spoke with that building owner to talk about fencing off an area or barricading off an area to create like a smoking section. That'll be part of, it's on that property, but it'll be not visible from the road and it'll keep people in a safe, contained space. I think that answered your questions.
Yes, thank you. So I guess some other concerns I have. I mean, I saw your spreadsheets. I saw the numbers of those folks that you've serviced through both the Armory and the Ramada. And it is a fact that we do have some people from outside of Lewiston that are coming in to receive these services, right? We are a service community. We know we have this happen already. How do we ensure that this is not going to be a Preble Street and a Bayside neighborhood situation that we're seeing all over the news right now? How do we ensure that we're not going to have to immediately have to get more bids right away because people are coming in, and they do come in from outside, and we'll say an Augusta hospital doesn't have room for anybody, and the next thing we know, somebody's here in a taxi cab from Augusta, dropped off somewhere, right? How do we handle that situation? And also, how do we know that this isn't going to grow bigger and invite more people? Because we have a serious homeless situation throughout the whole state, right? This is not just Lewiston. This is a regional issue. This is a state issue. So how do we ensure that that's not going to bring more in?
Did you want to go first? Okay.
I think, again, one of the differences between what we're proposing and what currently exists is it's a transitional resource center program. This is not going to be for every homeless person out there. There's some homeless people that thrive in that environment and choose that particular lifestyle. This particular program is going to have checks and balances attached to it, along with a plan for exiting the program. So it's not just a place where everyone can just come and stay and hang out and have a place to sleep all night and invite all of your friends from outside towns to come and hang out and get free internet and free TV. That's not what this is at all. It's a program to transition people out of living homeless situations into self-sustainability. So it's not something that everyone's going to want to sign up for, because there's a lot of homeless people that don't feel comfortable entering those type of programs or having those type of expectations that would be attached to showing progress, towards the end result. So I do think that is a huge differential in just providing people a place to stay and be able to go hang out in the community and then come back to at night. It's a program that's going to have expectations, goals, and long-term progress made, which again, like I said, is not going to be inviting to the average homeless person out there.
Okay.
And I could elaborate on that also. So I can share what we've done in the past at both the Ramada and the Armory program. When we had people that came in, I'm going to backtrack. Lewiston's a service center. Lewiston's been a service center for a long time. People have been coming into Lewiston, case managers and providers from outside of Lewiston have been putting people in taxis and sending them to Lewiston long before our temporary programs and since our temporary programs ended. It's going to keep happening. This is going to provide an option to, when it's appropriate for those people to stay here, and if there's a bed open, then that would be the logical solution. We work closely with Trinity Jubilee Center. We've worked with Lewiston PD as people were dropped off at Lewiston PD. We get people in, prioritize them from the Lewiston Auburn area. It's what we've done. We know that if a bed is opening up because somebody is discharging, and we know that Pete Smith has been hanging out at Trinity with no place to go every night, we know that we're prioritizing him to get into that slot before somebody from outside of the community. At the Ramada specifically, we had people, there was a lot of publicity around the program, I'm sorry, not at the Ramada, at the Armory. There was a lot of news coverage around that program, so we did have people coming from outside of the community that were getting in cabs and coming here on buses, however, and showing up at the door. And we connected those people to resources in their home communities. If they were seeking general assistance, we connected them to general assistance wherever they were from. There's a program through, it's tied to Catholic Charities of Maine, and it's the Help and Hope program. And it's a woman who fields all of those calls, and she buys bus tickets and plane tickets to get people back to their home location if they're from somewhere else in Maine or out of state. So we utilized that. We sent a couple people who were here from Massachusetts. We got them bus tickets back to Massachusetts. So we have resources in place and we have plans in place to mitigate that. It's not going to stop it. Nothing is going to stop that. People will continue to come to Lewiston. But this does provide an option for if somebody shows up in the Lewiston PD lobby with no shoes on in the middle of the night, which happened recently, they would at least be able to give us a call, and we could, if nothing else, we could give them a bed for the night and then connect them with the resources the next morning. We wouldn't be opposed to say, oh, well, we're not putting this person in our program because they're not local. We would take them in for a day or two and connect them back to their home communities. That's what we've been doing, and that's what we plan to continue to do.
Thank you. So a couple more questions. Did you look at other property outside of Lewiston? Did we look at Auburn? And has Auburn thought about opening something like this, or a shelter or a resource center? Have we had that conversation with Auburn? Auburn does not have any homeless shelter at all, but Lewiston does. Several.
My understanding is Auburn isn't zoned for a shelter, is what I was told. And so in order to even start the conversation of a shelter in Auburn, it would be a zoning issue. We would have to have zoning addressed, which is a very, that's a process. Auburn has expressed interest in a program like ours. We received people from Auburn. We received calls from Auburn General Assistance and Auburn PD during our temporary programs, and we were able to provide services to people from Auburn. We have prioritized our services here in Lewiston. The majority of our resources that we partner with here in Lewiston, the small businesses that helped serve our program for the last 2 years have been Lewiston-based businesses, with the exception of Auburn Cleaners, who have been amazing for us. And so to overcome the zoning issue, we started with the appropriately zoned areas of Lewiston, and we started looking at properties from there. And then we narrowed it down from there, taking into consideration the input from the business community that wanted some relief from the congestion in their doorways. And then taking into consideration residential areas and places where there would be a greater impact if there were if there were a program like this. And then we went down the line with that, addressing all of those needs and wants and desires of the community, and settled on this location, which provided the right space. Part of the building is already laid out the way that we would like to utilize it, so that reduces some of the construction costs. And it met all of those check boxes that we had received feedback on for what the community wanted.
So if the funding sources don't follow through and you don't reach you said you needed 600,000 in order, that's to buy the building, update the building, get it ready to go.
Correct.
But that doesn't cover any operational cost or any of that stuff.
Right.
So if you're not able to receive the funding, then this is completely off the table. If you don't get all three, is that what you stated? You need to have all of those pieces fall into place in order to have this go through?
In order to have it go through with the funding from Lewiston and Auburn. That's not to say that we
And the
won't
main
explore.
housing funding as well? Because you had three things there. You had main housing, and you had Auburn at 125, Lewiston at 325, and I forget what main housing was, if it was 125 or 150.
150, the balance, yes. Yes, so the current proposal right now, we're basing it contingent upon all those three things. If we don't receive the money from the city of Lewiston and/or the city of Auburn, we can repetition main housing for whatever portion that we need, and then we can arrange the rest through private funding.
Okay, so I guess, and I'm not sure if I'm done, but I'll be done for now. Just want to make one more last statement, is that I really feel that this is a regional issue. And I have concerns that we're not having conversations from the county offering money to help out. I think Lewiston is actually the place that it needs to go in Androscoggin County. I don't disagree with that whatsoever, that some sort of resource center or homeless shelter, because of the services we have here. But that being said, I think that it needs to be discussed on a regional level. And I don't think that it should just be Lewiston paying the majority of it because it is in Lewiston, because we will be seeing people from Turner, from Greene, from Auburn using these services. And so I'm very concerned that by not having the conversation with the county, with the state level even more, and that we're leaving potentially the money and issue in services that need to be provided outside of what you're going to provide, including the police department or any other thing that has to happen on the, Lewiston will be paying for that, and that I do have a bit of a concern about. I'm all set for now, thank you.
So just to reiterate, we do not have any expectation for local taxpayer funding for this from any community, Lewiston or Auburn. And Lewiston and Auburn are the only communities in Androscoggin County that have received this, the home ARPA funds. So if we were to approach any of the other communities in Androscoggin County, we would be asking for their local taxpayer funds. And we are bound and determined to not use local taxpayer money to support this program. We want to do it without putting any kind of a burden on the taxpayers anywhere.
Thank you for being so frank with your answers. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Oh, and I wanted to touch base on one of the things that you had said earlier about the Section 8, bridging that gap if somebody's waiting for Section 8. Currently, we have the ERA program, which is housing several unhoused people at the local hotels. The ERA program is open to anybody who is waiting for a Section 8 voucher, a family, an individual, and putting them up in different places, paying their first month's rent and security deposit, bridging that gap until those Section 8 vouchers come in. So we do have something in place for those situations right now. We don't necessarily have anything in place for what we're proposing.
Thank you.
Further questions from the council? Councilor LaChapelle.
First and foremost, thank you for your time and your effort. I can see the passion in all of your faces. This is a problem, no question about it. My firsthand experience, this is an issue, and as our esteemed councilor from Ward 1, this is an issue statewide. It's an issue nationwide. It's an issue worldwide. We've ignored it. We have a drastic problem with mental and drug addiction, and we as a society have ignored it forever. I'm not necessarily opposed, but I'm not necessarily supporting of this program. We have to address it at some point. The chicken is going to come home to roost. We have issues. I agree that this is a state issue, not necessarily a local issue. I find it virtually impossible that this program can proceed without some kind of municipal help. It's going to cost. So one of my questions would be, as Director Link said, are you able to move forward with this program without the HUD subsidy?
The home ARPA funds?
No, the 20.
With HUD, because what I read also, the separate bathrooms.
So my understanding, we've had extensive meetings with Maine Housing, extensive. They've never mentioned individual bathrooms. There has to be sufficient bathrooms for the population that's served, and it has to be non-congregate, and everybody has to have their own bed and their own walls and their own space, is how it was explained to us multiple times. So I wrote that down when Link said that, when Mr. Jeffers said that, and I plan to follow up with Maine Housing tomorrow, because we've had dozens of meetings with Maine Housing on this subject, and it has been explained to us, non-congregate, own space, own walls, own bed, and adequate bathroom space. But it has not been told to us that there will need to be individual bathrooms, so I'm going to follow up on that.
Because I have done extensive renovations of buildings in Lewiston, Auburn, and these numbers aren't even close to what it's going to cost to get that facility up and running. So I'm concerned that we're grossly under budgeted for this, and it's not budgeted for the long term. Am I correct on the understanding from Director Jeffries that you have to have the plan to keep this going for the next 5 or 10 years or
Yes.
whatever? So I am
And we have
correct.
predicted operational budgets, funding sources. We have all of that itemized as well for our 5 and 10-year. We have month, year, 3-year, 5-year, 10-year projected budgets in our operational budget.
And how do you plan on paying for that?
With the reimbursement rate through the eShop funding, the private donors that have already reached out to us, and the grants. We plan to employ a grant writer who is experienced in nonprofit grant writing, specifically to target the types of grants that we will need in order to be sustainable.
So just to follow it up, the director stepped up to the podium. Can you clarify the bathroom situation, if you'd be so kind?
I'd be happy to. I printed out the cheat sheet that HUD put together, and it was a notation from her conversation. So as I was glancing through it, she told me explicitly that it has to be private bathrooms for each unit. The kitchens can be shared. So, that type thing does work, but she was unequivocal about the bathrooms. It needs to be, and I'm not sure it needs to be a full-on shower, but you need a commode and a sink at a very minimum.
Okay, thank you.
And it may be a shower or bath as well, but at least a commode and a sink.
What would be the, thank you, Director. What would be the average stay of an individual in, I know you're making a difference between a shelter and a resource center. What would be the average stay of an individual in a resource center?
I'd say probably 60 to 90 days is our estimate currently.
We plan to do service plans with every individual at intake. And in that service plan process, we will ask them what their goals are, what needs they have, what they have to meet. For some people, that will be very simple. They just need an apartment. They have everything else in place. Other people will need everything from a birth certificate and a driver's license all the way up to Social Security, like everything. So it's going to vary from person to person. There'll be customized, individualized service plans with each person, revisited every 30 days, sort of in a case management type model. And this not only will keep people on track for their goals, it'll hold them accountable, and it'll help us document progress. Depending on what those goals are and what their needs are, that could be anywhere from a couple weeks for somebody who just needs a place to bridge that gap to longer. We were able to house, I don't have the numbers in front of me now, 42 and 59% of the people in the two programs. The first one ran for 15 weeks. We didn't even have services the full 15 weeks. The second program ran from halfway through November of 2020 to September of 2021, and we were able to house just basically 60% of people in that time. So
in
that
that
gives them,
time, you're dealing with trying to get them off drugs or whatever the case may be.
Connecting them with whatever resources they need.
Addressing the mental illness situation.
Yes.
One of the, and I'm jumping back to a prior meeting that we had somebody sitting down here, and they were talking about the services that they provide for some of a needle exchange program and stuff like. Is that the type of things that would be happening on the facility also?
Nope, we intend to be a low barrier program. We do support the harm reduction model. We would be connecting people with resources elsewhere that needed those support services. If somebody needs a needle exchange, we would connect them with the place that's set up here in Lewiston for needle exchange. We would be connecting people with those resources. Those will not be in-house services.
Okay. I'm very concerned on the budget. I don't think our numbers are accurate at all. I think it's much higher than that. And it would be an absolute shame to get a quarter of the way through and just run out of money. I do believe this is a statewide issue, and it should be addressed on a state level, not just on a municipal level. And lastly, some of the people that you put up on the screen, I would encourage you not to do that in the future. I personally know a couple of those people, and one of them was killed, just didn't die, and he was not loved by his family and his children. It was a very difficult situation. He has a rap sheet that would fill that table, and what he's done to other people in this community is vicious.
Everybody has a past, but that doesn't mean they deserve to die.
I have a past also, and I know I just encourage you not to portray them as saints. They died, no question about, no, he was killed. He didn't, dying is different than the way it's portrayed. It's a
Sinner or
totally-
saint, I believe very firmly that everybody deserves housing. It's a human right, and everybody deserves to be acknowledged when they pass away, and nobody should die alone, homeless,
And I
unsupported.
respect your opinion, I just respect my opinion at the same time. I disagree on some of these individuals. Thank you.
Yes.
Further questions from the council? Councillor Scott?
So what are the next steps? What are we moving forward with? Are you meeting with Auburn next? Do we have to, what's the time frame on this? Is it coming back to city council? Will we have a public comment section on this at some point where we have a public hearing on this so that the public can speak about this and talk about this, and we can get, you know, some more information from others that may be in the area, or without saying where it is exactly just yet? Do you know what the next steps are?
So we do have a survey out. We've only gotten, I think, 250-ish responses to the survey, but we've pushed that out community-wide through businesses, the hospitals, the public health committee, the homeless committee, the city's public health and homeless committees, the
Healthy neighborhoods.
Healthy Neighborhoods, put it in their letterhead. We've paid to target certain wards based upon zip codes and not zip codes, wards and addresses in the surrounding neighborhood. But we have that data, we can send it to all of you if you want, but we haven't gotten a lot of responses. In a city of 36,000+ people, we've gotten 250-ish responses. So we wanted to leave that open to get more responses. But that is out, we are still collecting information that way, and we are still going out on the streets, talking to people, getting input from the community. My understanding is that most of the municipalities are not requiring like city council presentations in this process that we're going through here in order to allocate the funds that are coming in for the home ARPA program. I don't know if that is a decision that lies in Link's office. I don't know how the city of Lewiston is going to be handling that, so I can't answer that piece of it. But
Councillor, or Director Jeffers, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, we all get too comfortable with each other. It's like, what's your last name again? It's a requirement of home that we would need to go through a process, and it would entail lots of public engagement, lots of discussion, and a presentation to the council on here's the options before you for the council, and probably with a recommendation as well. I believe the Citizen Advisory Committee who serves on CDBG would probably be pretty involved with it as well.
And then I would add that at that point, the council needs to accept and appropriate those funds.
That's what I wanted to ask. So there will be a vote by the council to accept and appropriate the $325,000 to be used towards this.
It would be accept and appropriate how you deem to use that funds.
How do you, okay, thank you. Thank you. And at some point, if I may, sir, and excuse me, I apologize, Counselor. I would like to hear from Misty Parker as well about what she may have heard from businesses and on economic development and how this might affect in the area any economic development. That's it, almost said, thank you.
Councillor Clement.
Mr. Mayor, I believe we've all received a packet of emails, or I think we should have by now, to answer your question, Councilor Scott, but I would agree. What I would like to see, echoing the concerns from Councilor LaChapelle, I think this budget is unreasonable. I don't think you're going to be able to do it for anywhere near the cost you propose. The fact that we brought up the possibility of 24 individual bathrooms is going to add significant cost. I've heard from the city of Auburn informally that, we're not going to get involved in that. I don't know that they've had a meeting. You talk about you're not expecting any taxpayer funds. You're expecting HUD, you're expecting FEMA. Well, I beg to differ with you. Those are taxpayer funds.
they are, yes. I said
They
no
come out of
local
my pocket,
taxpayer
your
funds.
pocket, everybody's pocket in here. The only difference is they're spread across the country.
Right.
I'm paying for something in Walla Walla, Washington, as well as Lewiston. So that is something we need to get rid of in front. It's taxpayer money.
Yes.
And I cannot believe that you are going to operate this long-term without coming back to the city, and that's my biggest concern. I hear from a lot of my constituents, they don't want their taxpayer dollars involved in this. Granted, I'm a different area of the city, but they do not want their dollars involved. And I have always voted with my constituents. Okay, so I would like to see a budget, a long-term operational budget, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, if you intend to be for 10 years. I'd like to see how you propose to handle that, where you're expecting your sources. I just think that that's a reasonable thing before we commit 300, and I believe there's a discrepancy. I'm seeing $350,000.
We adjusted that based upon the numbers that the city had.
They adjusted to 325.
Oh, they adjusted at 325. Well, keep adjusting, and maybe we can come to a figure we're comfortable with. I don't know. But 325, based on our interaction thus far, I mean, when you come to the city and ask us, we are the stewards of the taxpayers' money. They expect us to handle it wisely. We ask questions. We are not badgering people. We feel that we should be trusted. When you come to me and say, I want X number of dollars, you should be able to tell me what for and where and why and when and how. If you can't do that, then indeed there is a problem. Until I get that information, I just can't act on it.
What information do you feel you don't have? I think we've been very thorough.
Well, I
this
think we
evening.
have now. We had to come to that understanding, and I think the process we had to utilize was long, drawn out, and unnecessary.
I sent an email to every city councilor over a week ago, inviting every single one of you, if you were interested in discussing this in person, via email, via phone, to reach out to any of us, and we would answer all of those questions ahead of time. That was an open invitation that very few actually took advantage of. But we've been transparent from the start. We've been very clear. The only thing that we did not disclose publicly was the location of the building, and that is to secure our negotiation rights.
Okay, and I guess to that end, you don't have a negotiated settlement for this location.
No, we're in the process of negotiations.
So it may or may not come to fruition. Okay, all right.
Yes.
Thank you,
And on the
Mr.
subject, we have acknowledged throughout all of this that local taxpayer money is not what we're requesting. We will not be coming to the city to ask for Lewiston municipal taxpayer funds. Obviously, everybody knows that any kind of FEMA funding, federal funding, state funding, housing funding, HUD funding, all of that, we're all paying, every single one of us, including the 5 of us sitting at this table. There's no argument about that. We are not going to be asking for Lewiston-specific taxpayer money through the city of Lewiston, paid municipally through here, property tax, any of that.
You can
So
give us
that's
a
the
written
that's the
guarantee of that
distinction.
in perpetuity.
Yes,
Okay. We may ask for that if it gets
Yes.
to that point. Thank you.
thank you.
Councilor Harriman.
First off, thank you all for your presentation. I don't so much have any questions. I just wanted to voice my support for the proposal. I think it's, honestly, it's a pretty small ask. I would like to get the issues cleared up with the potential issue of the bathrooms and the other issues that we've heard. But frankly, it's inhumane what we're doing right now, and we need to do something. And I feel like this is a good first step, and it's a small ask.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to say, to follow up on that, I find it kind of ironic that these conversations of providing services to the homeless community and addressing homelessness in Lewiston have been occurring for decades. We had a 10-year plan that failed to produce any results. And we come to the city council with a very small ask, and we're told that it's too low, and so we won't support it. Had we come with a larger ask, we would be told it's too large and we can't support it. So it almost feels like people just don't want to support homelessness. They just want the problem to go away. It was reported to us that somebody had said, yeah, this is a great program, let's put it out in Green. Green does not have the capacity to support this program. Green does not have the resources that Lewiston has. Lewiston is the resource center. There's a reason people come to Lewiston. It's because this is where the services are. It's going to continue to happen. It's going to continue to be a problem. The residents of Ward 6 can stay in Ward 6 and they can ignore that it's an issue, but for the people that live in this area, it's a very visible issue, and it's a very impacting issue. And I'm sorry if some residents of Ward 6, we've gotten great feedback from Ward 6 on our survey, so that do support the program. But if the whole city doesn't want to support it because it's not in their backyard and it's not something that they have to see every day, then I'm sorry, but it's an issue, it's a big issue, and we can't continue to ignore it.
Councilor McCarthy.
I think the issue is not the size of the ask, or the biggest thing is it, to me, is like, this is too early in the process. I don't think you have a good understanding of what your costs are going to be. I would have liked to have seen a 10-year operating budget and where you expect to get these funds. A little concerned that it's grants and donations, and all of those things are fleeting when it comes to the economy. If the economy goes down, that money dries up. If the economy goes down, your demand goes up. So it's, it's just too many open questions. I was in the size of the project, the budget, from my personal experience, I don't see how in the world you could do what you want to do just without the addition of the 24 individual bathrooms. I think $600,000 is nowhere near what you're going to need. And I think that's one of the things that bothered some of the other counselors is we want to know what it's going to actually cost, not what you're hoping it's going to cost. And that's what it seems like. These are hopes, not actual concrete figures. And I think that's where some of the issues are with us, is that it's not doable in our mind, and so we're just shutting off. I want to see something that's actually doable, long-term, sustainable. I think the goals are well-intended. I've always maintained that I think a lot of the homelessness and people who are down and out in their luck need the support situation, a place to get showered, someone to counsel them on how to apply for jobs and stuff like that. I think that's all stuff that's needed for the homelessness, but it needs to be a heck of a lot more set in concrete as far as numbers and figures and how this is all going to pull together. So that's my big question, and I think that's part of what everybody is concerned with up here. Thank you.
We have those operational budgets already compiled. They were required for our presentation to Maine Housing. We can email those out. We didn't include them in the presentation because we're not seeking operational funds from the city of Lewiston, but we can send those to you. We already have those prepared. And I would like to point out that that's how every nonprofit works. It's a lot of projections, and it's a lot of relying on how fickle the economy is, the politics are, and all of that. And we have plenty of successful nonprofits in the community that have withstand recessions, that have withstand a pandemic. We have Kevin's nonprofit that has been sustainable throughout the pandemic and everything else here in Lewiston, with no public funds, with no requests for taxpayers, privately funded through grants, donations for 5 years. So Kevin, sitting right here at this table, is an example of the sustainability. This is on a wider scale. I've managed the budgets on these projects for the last 21 months that were far higher, and managed to, Kimber and I have worked diligently to keep those budgets down from what the predictions were at the state for what it would cost, from what other agencies are doing in other communities, the amount of budget that they're using unnecessarily. We're very fiscally responsible. We're very conservative with how we spend our money. We keep our budget low, we keep it tight, and we monitor everything. And so it may appear to some people that we don't know what we're talking about. We don't have the experience with budgets. We don't have the experience with nonprofit management, financial management, but I'm telling you that we do. We do have this experience, and we are confident in our ability to make this work and meet those goals. The bathroom is a situation, the bathroom situation is an issue that we need to address, and I'm already thinking about some things that I can't say because of the location. But yes, we are going to follow up on the bathroom situation, and that may adjust what our plans are, but otherwise we do have all of those budgets, and we are confident that it can be a sustainable program.
Yeah, and I'd like to just follow up on that from a nonprofit standpoint. What you explained as far as relying on grants and funding and public, that's literally my world. Like that's what I've done for 5 years. So if I had to put together a plan 5 years ago that would have said 5 years from now you'll have 2 locations, 5,000 square feet, and multiple organizations connected for resources, that plan would have never come together out of the bedroom in my home where we started. So sometimes you have to realize that you have to jump into the process to really realize how you get to that end result. So I appreciate the question in regards to funding, and it's a much larger scale, but we've had the ability to grow from what would be considered a snowflake to a snowball in the community without ever having to come to the city for any type of public funding or financing.
Councilor LaChapelle?
Again, thank you for all your work you're doing. I don't think anybody does not want to help the homeless. That's just a logical thing. Are there any other programs in the state? You know, the state's just got billions of dollars. Is there something on a statewide level that we can get some assistance to address this? I don't want to sell you short. You're doing a wonderful job with the finances that you have. My personal experiences tell me, and I'm only speaking of construction.
Yeah.
I haven't done grants. I haven't done any of that stuff. I just don't think we're in that realm to get it off the ground. And
No,
it's not an insult. It's not saying that you're too low. I just don't think there's enough resources to get that program going. And that's one of my concerns on it.
You're referring to the capital costs,
Yes.
Counselor?
Yes, the capital cost, purchasing the building, rehabbing the building, security in the building, cameras, you're going to have to put in a sprinkler system in it. That's $60,000 without blinking an eye. We can go down the whole list on it. And that's my concern on it. And I do believe that this is a statewide, nationwide issue, that it's still an issue that I think we need help in Lewiston from the state. And there's a saying, build it and they will come. And the problem is bigger than just Lewiston, than Auburn, than Greene, than Turner. This is an issue we have to address. We have to start someplace. I'm not arguing that. I think we need to get more partners in on the program. We need to draw in the state and get more assistance. So
Maine
I
Housing
don't want to
has-
disrespect you. I thank you for your work. Thank you for your dedication. It's a worthy cause, not arguing any of that. I just don't, I'm having a problem with the math, and I don't want to sit here in a year from now and 2 years from now, and with all great intentions, that we come in and say, listen, we've been serving these people, our funding's driving, and it just puts us in a really tough spot, because I can't look at the school department and say, hey, can we grab $1 million from you, and can we grab, the park and recreation? There's only so much money in the bucket, and we have to be good stewards. You're doing a great job. I commend you for your financial responsibilities.
There's an additional pool of funding that we are petitioning for, but we haven't gotten any further in that process yet through Maine Housing. And that is the 15.8 million, I think it is, that came into the state of Maine through Maine Housing, that's currently in the process of being allocated, and that we are requesting some of that for. That would potentially go to the capital costs or go into the bank for the operating costs. And that money is specifically designated for the state of Maine, just under 16 million, and there's 16 counties in the state. That is additional pool of money that we may be drawing from. We haven't gotten any further in that process yet. But there is additional funds that we can petition for moving forward.
Is there a sunset on any of these requests from HUD, is there, we have to use this money by 2022, 2025? Is there a sunset?
I'm sure there is an end date. I don't know those end dates. Our urgency is that we're not going to go anywhere near that end date. We're going to request it long before then. We're working on this daily right now, so I don't think we're going to go anywhere near those end dates. We're going to tackle that immediately.
Thank you.
Councilor Clement?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just so our presenters know, I am not against your proposal. I sit here as tonight one member was here from the previous council. We heard the complaints from the previous shelters. I got the telephone calls about the various things, and some of the things I won't even describe in public that happened. Before I can see the city signing on to something like this, I think we need some method of control. And I would propose that if there's consensus amongst the council, we approach Corporation Council and ask whether or not we could have some type of a licensing ordinance that would give us some enforcement control over these types of entities, so they just don't come in and operate willy-nilly. I mean, I've talked to police officers in Bayside. I was a police officer for 45 years. I know the problems attendant with these places, and I just don't want to see them occur anymore in Lewiston. I'm not against providing services for people that really need them. You come to me and need a hand up, I don't have a problem with a hand up. It's when you come back every week for the next 50 years expecting a hand out. That's when I have a problem, okay? But I am gun shy, and I can't fault my colleagues here on the dais because they haven't experienced the calls that we got. When the armory opened up, that was completely without the council's knowledge until after the fact. And instantly, the problem arose, we had to have a police officer there 24/7 because of the activity, not necessarily in the shelter, but the neighboring residences around there. I mean, the stuff that happened was truly eye-opening, and it was despicable. It should not have happened, but it did. And we had a police officer there 24/7. Now, yeah, it wasn't public funds. No, it was federal funds, but federal funds, the last I checked, are public funds. It's just they're spread out a little bit wider. There is no such thing as a money tree. If there were, we wouldn't have the problems we have right now. We're entering into our budget season, and I think if these folks here are not aware of what that's going to entail, they're going to get a rude awakening very shortly. They're going to find out that we've got way more requests than we have resources, okay? $350,000, yeah, out of $140 million, it's not all that much, but it's things that could be used for various things. Anyway, I concur with the operational costs. I just don't think your budget is realistic. I've dealt with budgets my adult life in government. I have seen entities vow that, oh, we don't expect that we're ever going to ask you for any money. And the next thing you know, oh, we'd like to make it, but we need your help. And we're a little gun shy about that kind of stuff. It's not, you talk about trust and transparency. Give us a reason. Give us a reason to trust, okay? And when it comes to the idea, I think having Corporation Council advise us as to how we could license these facilities might be the way to go. Gives us some control over the operation of the facility, what kinds of behavior you could anticipate or regulate. I think that was half the problem in Portland. The horror stories I heard in talking with the police down there. I mean, just recently, South Portland has come out with a study on crime rates attendant to a shelter down there. I realize this is not a shelter, it's a resource center, but a component of the resource center is a shelter, from what I read in your presentation. And we just want to make sure that we're proactively considering those things that we have seen happen before, we don't want repeated, if that's reasonable.
No, absolutely. And I think I would just like to kind of highlight on that if you drive by the proposed location of our resource center, all of the things that you just explained are already happening. So we can turn a blind eye to that and act like this isn't a current reality, but we're not bringing this to the neighborhood. This is in our neighborhood. So we can either address it or we can ignore it. We've chosen to ignore it. That's why we're currently sitting in front of you. But this is a reality in our cities. I live this every day. I talk to these people every day. I see the disconnect every day. People on Ward 6 don't see that disconnect. People out towards Green don't see that disconnect. We see it. The five of us here are heavily connected to the homeless community and the nonprofit organizations that provide resources to these individuals. I feel like we've been slightly discredited with what we've been bringing to the table based off of previous experiences with the community that we're trying to support. This exists currently. I can assure you the police are answering calls for the homeless people. That's not happening just at shelters, that's happening throughout our city. So this resource center is not bringing anything to the table that doesn't exist. So we can act like it doesn't exist and turn a blind eye to it, but we're doing an extreme disservice to our community.
And I would like to clarify for the counselors who were not on the previous committee, the council, and anyone listening in public. It wasn't a result of issues at the Armory program that the police presence was there 24 hours a day. In the planning stages, the week and a half leading up to the development of the Armory program, we consulted with Preble Street, because Preble Street was already operating a similar program out of USM in Portland. And they recommended that we have 24-hour police presence. So that was incorporated into the budget proactively. Ultimately, we didn't need 24-hour police presence. The amount of times that we accessed to the police in the parking lot, many of them were because our staff were untrained and they didn't know how to manage two people arguing over toothpaste and things like that. Yes, there were crimes in the community. Yes, there were issues with people being intoxicated and passing out on people's front porches. We put a shelter together in a week and a half and we dumped it in a very heavily congested residential neighborhood in a community that was not prepared for that and has not dealt with that. And we mitigated that every single day. When the complaints came in, we went out, we printed up flyers, and we went to every single house in a mile radius around the Armory. I did it myself, and my staff walked door to door to door, and we gave people flyers, and I gave them my personal phone number, and I said, if you have a problem, if you have a person passed out on your front porch, if you find a needle in your yard, if any of these things happen, call me immediately, and I will address it immediately. And 24 hours a day, the entire time that program was running, even if I was at home and in bed, if my phone rang, I got up, I put on clothes, and I went and addressed issues. The community, the area that program was put was not an appropriate area, but it was something that was thrown together last minute in response to the pandemic. That is not an appropriate gauge for the homeless community or for a program operating. It was not put in it was put in a place where it needed to be put at the time because there were no other options. It was not the right place for it.
I just think in this particular case, we're looking for some assurance that we're not going to experience those problems again.
We don't want to experience those problems.
Exactly.
As the service
I would certainly hope
providers,
not.
we don't want to experience it either.
So we're looking for the insurances in that regard, and if it takes a licensing ordinance, I think that's a wonderful idea. Then we would be able to address the larger entities that you spoke of earlier. If they think they're going to come in and run roughshod over the city, no, not going to happen.
It's hard to operate a low barrier program if there's ordinances like that in place. I just wanted to point that out. The purpose of low barrier is to eliminate those kind of barriers.
I think we know well what you're talking about there. Thank you. Mayor.
Councilor Clement, do you have a further question?
I have, yes, I would ask that you take a consensus of the council to approach Corporation Counsel, our city attorney, for advice as to how to establish an ordinance procedure for these types of facilities. That can be handled through communication with the city administrator and myself, whoever. But I think we need to talk with Corporation Counsel and find out just what's on the horizon and what we can do to ensure that we don't experience these negative impacts that have occurred in the past.
Thank you. Councilman LaChapelle, did you have something?
I just had a quick question. Low impact versus high impact. Please just review it again for me. Low impact shelter, you keep on saying.
Low barrier?
Low barrier, I'm sorry, low barrier.
So the list of barriers that was just a sample of barriers that medium and high barrier shelters put in place. Low barrier basically means if somebody is intoxicated or under the influence and they show up at our door, we're not going to turn them away and leave them stumbling in the street. They can come in as long as they behave appropriately, safe for themselves, safe for others around them. It's explained, I'm not sure if it was in the memo that we sent to you or the slideshow, but it explained that does not waive accountability, that does not waive appropriate behaviors in safe spaces and things like that. But currently, somebody who's untreated mental illness won't be accepted into a high barrier shelter. Somebody who may have schizophrenia and isn't treated and they're yelling and screaming at random hours of the night will be excluded from all of our shelters. People who have previously been prescribed medications but are not currently taking them are eliminated from the shelters. Somebody who doesn't have a valid form of identification, which if you know anything about homeless people, their stuff gets stolen or lost all the time. So very few of them have identification. If they don't have a valid form of identification, they're blocked. So low barrier just eliminates all of those, not all of those barriers. We're not proposing a no barrier shelter, which for clarification's sake, Preble Street's program is a no barrier shelter. We are proposing a low barrier shelter. There is a differentiation, and we do have a bar of accountability and appropriate behaviors.
Thank you.
Administrator Hunter, is there
No, I was just verifying something, thank you.
Councilor McCarthy.
Just one thing, you mentioned, we talking about the police that were stationed outside of the armory, and you said that they weren't needed very often, but don't you think just the presence there was needed and kept things more under control than they would have been if there had been no police officer?
If you listen to what Councilor Clement is saying, that the presence didn't seem to have an impact at all. It did actually. Several of the community members stated when we were going door to door, they did state that they felt comfortable knowing that there was a police presence. The majority of the calls were, there were packages, UPS packages had been delivered, and some of the people from our program, while they were out and about in the community, had taken packages off of porches. There was a complaint of, in one of the fields that are behind the armory, somebody was observed going to the bathroom in the field with their pants down. The majority of the calls were related to people heading downtown and coming back up that stretch from Five Corners up Central Avenue, people sitting on people's front porches and smoking cigarettes, people sitting on people's front porches and passing out. That was the majority of the calls in that area.
Okay, so, but you would admit that the police presence probably toned down the number of calls that we would have gotten if they hadn't been there?
It's possible.
Okay, because that isn't in the program, your program moving forward.
Right, and we had 0 community complaint calls once we moved to the Ramada program. There was, somebody had called from the mini mall across the street from the Ramada to say that there was some trash left on one of the benches. But other than that, there have been no neighborhood complaints or anything similar to the Armory program once we moved to the Ramada.
Okay, thank you.
And we did not have 24-hour police presence there.
I was gonna say, yeah, the Ramada didn't have that.
Exactly.
And then if I'm not, or maybe I'm mistaken, but if I'm not mistaken, so they were all housed in the gym, correct? Spaced
At the
6
Armory,
feet.
yes.
Right, yes, spaced 6 feet apart.
Correct.
And then at the Ramada, what were sleeping conditions, quarters looking
We
like?
had 28 beds in 14 rooms, 2 beds per room. Well, one of the rooms had 1 bed. We had 2 beds per room, except for 1 room had 1 bed.
Okay. And that likely contributed to, there's not as many people in the same place.
Right, and
Yeah.
there's a perimeter around the Ramada with a large parking lot. We weren't directly, step off the yard, off the property or somebody's backyard. It was a different situation. It was also a different time of the year. People are more mobile in the summer than they are in the winter, and the Ramada program was predominantly in the winter, so people were less likely to go out anyways. There's a lot of different factors involved. Our staff
And-
was much better trained at that point to be able to manage behaviors.
I was just about to say, as things progressed, the staff started getting experience.
Right.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank
We
you.
also had a curfew at both of those programs, so there were some police calls that were responded to that ultimately didn't pan out because it was assumed that those were related to the programs either at the Armory or the Ramada, but ultimately it was determined through our cameras and our 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew that we had at both programs that the people in our program could not have committed those crimes because they were indoors at those times. And we were able to provide our security system to back that up in addition to our curfew.
Thank you. Further, Councilor Scott.
I just want to thank you again for coming out this evening, and I also want to reiterate that these are some tough questions that you've had to filter through tonight. But that is our responsibility as counselors, to ask these tough questions and to ensure that we're getting everything that needs to be heard and all the information out there for everybody in the community, right? And that we're helping people in the community understand everything that's happening. So I know this isn't easy, but I appreciate both yourselves and my fellow counselors that I understand this is a tough conversation to have, right? But we'll get through it and we'll figure it out. And I appreciate you coming this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope that these discussions, they are tough conversations, and we've been having these conversations with city councils and agencies and everybody for a very long time, and then they taper off as interest wanes. And I hope that this is the conversation, the tough conversation that actually pushes us over that barrier and we start acting instead of just talking.
Further questions or comments from councilors? Councilor Clement?
Mr. Mayor, will you ask for the consensus that I requested?
I will not.
Thank you, sir.
Further questions or comments? Well, I guess any questions from staff?
Not at this juncture.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate your efforts to address this issue in our community. And yeah, I, for one, do not believe that we can't pretend that we don't have a homeless problem now. And we should definitely address this, and I appreciate your efforts. Thank you so much. I look forward to getting this done. Administrator Hunter, do we need a motion to adjourn?
No, we're in a workshop. We can just close it.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Or good night now.